Hi guys, Freddy here. Welcome back to another Retro RPG. And at the end of another week, and the end of another poll, well, yous did it. I told yous not to do it, but yous did it anyway. You voted in the Star Wars Technical Companion to win the poll. Now, it'd have been better if we'd been doing Goroth, but we're going to be doing this. And it's a great book, let's be honest. Anyway, as usual, I'll be back at the end of the video with some other channel-related stuff and some other poll-related stuff. But a wee reminder that if you'd like to support the channel, or you'd like to see these videos a week early, then we've got a Patreon in the description down below. If you click on that, it'd be very much helpful to the channel. Anyway, I hope to see you at the end of the video. So, this is the Star Wars Death Star Technical Companion. Came out in 1993 for West End Games for their version of the Star Wars role-playing game, the second edition of it in fact. Now this details the construction and operation of the first Death Star. It doesn't really mention the second Death Star at all. But one of the things the book is very clear about is that the Galactic Empire in Star Wars uses modular technology. So the things detailed in this book are going to be used throughout the Empire. So it enhances the use of this book by laying out that these aren't just things you will find on the Death Star, you'll find them everywhere. So, for example, the prison block we see in Star Wars A New Hope. The prison block is of a standard design that is used on the Death Star, that is used on Star Destroyers, are used in Imperial bases, and you can break out this book whenever the players are dealing with a prison block. And the same with all the other areas in it. But let's have a look at the back cover. So, the Star Wars Death Star Technical Companion by Bill Slavicsek. The regional governors now have direct control over their territories. Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station. It is a period of galactic civil war. On one side, a ragtag collection of freedom fighters called the Rebel Alliance. On the other, the terrible might of the Empire, best symbolized by the technological terror known as the Death Star. An armored battle station the size of a small moon, the Death Star packed enough firepower to destroy planets. Alliance researchers have uncovered many of the secrets of the most devastating weapon in galactic history, and gathered the information together in this one volume. The Death Star has been destroyed, but its legacy lives on. Now, this is obviously coming out in 1993. It's not going to cover any of the information which came out in Rogue One, and basically in the Disneyverse version. Things which have come out through Rebels, even the prequels. This is detailing the version of the Death Star which was canon at that point in time, being built around the world of Despair, that Tarkin was in charge of throughout, took a close personal hand in its construction, instead of it being the guy out of Rogue One. It's an alternate version of the Death Star compared to the now timeline. Inside, absolutely lovely artwork throughout. West End Games had very high production quality, and it's very nice. We've got things like this concept artwork by Ralph McQuarrie for when they were actually making Star Wars A New Hope. And we've got other artwork throughout, of the battle over the Death Star. We've got the introduction. So it talks through what was amazing about the Death Star, how the technical companion is going to break down in a rough fashion, because there's no way you could go through every corridor of the Death Star in one tiny book. It is the size of a small moon. How to use this volume with a Star Wars role-playing game. And then we go into Grand Moff Tarkin's data journal. Now, this is detailing from Tarkin writing to the Emperor about the problems he sees and laying down what becomes known as the Tarkin Doctrine. That star systems, if they are afraid of one thing, if the Death Star is built and everybody is terrified of it, it means you don't need a massive fleet of ships. And the fact that the Death Star is quite slow in its movement, Tarkin sees as enhancing this, because people will have time to be terrified knowing that the Death Star is coming. But it goes through him writing and laying out his ideas, the massive firepower needed, a symbol to put everybody in fear and the danger of the rising rebellion. Then we've got the Emperor's advisors writing back, authorizing Tarkin and making him a Grand Moff. And we go through the project underway as he brings in Bevel Lemelisk as the admirals come on board, Admiral Motti and General Tag joining the team. As they come up with different things, the Death Star must feature a single weapon of mass destruction. In addition, the Death Star must include surface defenses rivaling those of the Imperial core worlds. Must not only move through normal space, must have the ability to travel through hyperspace. It must be self-sufficient. And as the realities cut in, obviously it's going to be massive and it's going to be slow. Now, as I said, it only covers the first Death Star, although we have an image here, obviously, of Return of the Jedi. The story continues as the ideas come together. Vader comes on board the team towards the end to motivate people. It mentions the construction around Despair, the use of Wookiee slaves to build it. Then, towards the end of the construction, we've got Lemelisk getting moved on to build the torpedo spheres, which were basically miniature Death Stars. I'll point to that. This book also hammers forth that because torpedo spheres are far more common, but use the same design elements, that this book is basically a guide to torpedo spheres as well. And at the end, we've got Tarkin getting raided on the way to the Death Star, and Akbar, his servant. Losing a Mon Calamari is like losing a trusted pet. But Akbar gets liberated and reveals to the rebellion lots of information about the Death Star project. Then we're on to the sections itself. So technical specifications. We've got the stats here. Now, it's got its super laser doing 12D damage, 5,000 turbo laser batteries, heavy turbo lasers, laser cannons, ion cannons, tractor beam emplacements. We've got 3 years supplies, 1 million kilotons of cargo, 600,000 passengers, and how they're broken down, the crew of over 250,000. Just all the details of the Death Star just to use its stats. We then also break down how it's laid out. So the Death Star it lays out is set into the core of it is mainly machinery, whereas these surface areas, the surface sectors, are city blocks, and they're the areas we're going to detail most. Here it's got scale of Star Destroyers to it. We lay out the various hemispheres and zones. So laying out the sort of 12 zones on the top and bottom of the Death Star. The defense status levels, def stats. The ships that it carries, 3,600 assault shuttles, 7,200 TIE fighters, 1,400 AT-ATs, just overwhelming forces aboard it. We've got the command structure of it. We've even got computer programming flowcharts. So in the early 90s, we've got cyberpunk games coming out and changing the way that people did computer hacking. Before that, it would just be a simple dice roll and you would hack a terminal. But cyberpunk brought out that you'll be moving through nodes. So they've kind of introduced that here, where different sections have different difficulties as you gain access to more or less sections of the Death Star. So if you're just trying to get service things, the target numbers are going to be moderate. But you can use that to move on to technical or take control of hangar bays, security sections, command, but these have higher target numbers. It goes on to the city sprawls and trenches, laying out how those are. And goes into details of one, North Sector 7, A68. It's got shield projectors and operation stations. General quarters, command center, communications, hangars, because it is so massive that everything is broken down and you've got local versions of everything. It's not like the Death Star has one prison section. because it would take you hours to travel there. City sprawl map, so laying out the layout on the surface trenches, just going into details of that. It mentions that Sector A68 has a black market, and it goes into details about that, how it's different to other areas. And then we're on to more generic things. So we've got hangar bays, which can be common throughout the Death Star and common throughout the Empire. So it's giving you the layout, and it's talking about typical hangar bays. It talks about TIE Fighter bays, and it shows you the crawlways and the layout where the TIE Fighters are hung from the ceiling. With all these TIEs, why did we win at Yavin? We've got the Space Traffic Control Center, maintenance, storage docks, lots of lovely photographs of very shiny floored Imperial hangars. The tractor beam projectors, it breaks down those and gives you more details. And then we're on to sector organization. So we can see that there are turbo lifts to help you get around. Turbolift cluster stations, crew and officer mess halls, rec rooms. And then we've got the layouts of them. So we've got crew living quarters showing the bunks that they sleep in with sonic showers at the end. Crew mess halls, obviously just benches and tables with the food preparation areas, droid storage and power charge stations, storage rooms. And then we go through, so we've got rec room facilities. So they've got hollow obstacle and combat training simulation systems, weight machines, sparring courts with officers' refreshment bars, more droids and equipment, showing the air leads off to turbolift clusters, giving you an idea of the layout of these areas if you're passing through it. Obviously, rooms like this would be common on Star Destroyers as well. Then we've got the layout of quarters for officers, typical lieutenant's quarters, typical major's quarters, where the major gets a room to himself, desk, work consoles, screens, a holopad so he can communicate, whereas the lieutenants are crammed in sort of 4 to 1 room, sharing somewhat. We've got the officers' mess, because of course the officers don't eat with the enlisted men, where they have better quality food. It mentions that as well. We've got the service and technical sectors, giving you an idea what the uniforms look like and the layouts, going through the various technical sectors, what droids are available, showing you examples of things being moved around and constructed. You can see the head of a vehicle being moved there with tractor beams. Got medical facilities, the drive facilities, because of course the Death Star doesn't have just a single drive section, it's got thrusters all over it so it can move in every direction. Hyperdrive stations. Then we're on to military sectors. So the war room, where commands are handed out from. Armories. And then goes into details of the uniforms of all the different divisions of troopers serving on board the Death Star. Turbo laser tower, showing its layout with the capacitor banks beneath the actual barrels of the weapon and the rooms where the gunnery crew work. Super laser firing stations, showing the layout of the Death Star super laser and going into details about that. We're on to security stations, so where all the guards are. We've got Imperial Security Bureau offices, we've got guard posts, armories, surveillance stations where they keep monitoring everything around the Death Star, or any Imperial post of course. The security uniforms. Then we've got the layouts of the detention blocks. I have to admit, at first I thought this was really wrong, because I thought that Luke, Chewbacca and Han came directly out of a turbo lift into the detention block, whereas this shows that there's an open shaft with the turbo lifts around it, and then the detention blocks break off from that. But I realised that it isn't necessarily the turbo lift they're coming from. It was just my impression of that. They were just coming through a doorway. So this could well be correct. It's just it gave me a slightly different impression from when I'd watched the movie. We've got the command sectors. So, like Star Destroyers, we've got the crew pits down below, so the officers walk above and look down. We've got these weird circular control panels, and it explains what each section does. We see those in Return of the Jedi on the Death Star 2. We've got the overbridge. So while there's individual bridges in each zone, there's the overbridge where Tarkin commands from. And it shows the layout of that. Then we've got the people on board, so Tarkin and the various admirals, generals, down to majors, commanders. Vader's listed as an Imperial emissary. We've got Imperial advisors, although we never see any of those in A New Hope. And as the Emperor liked to have throne rooms everywhere, it's got the layout of his throne room. Now, I'm not sure this is supposed to be the one from Return of the Jedi, or whether the Death Star 1 had a slightly different version, but it's similar enough. And then we're on to the appendices. We've got a talk about design flaws. The design flaws were overconfidence. The Empire didn't believe anybody could destroy the Death Star, so they never really put much effort into defending it. The Force. They didn't really understand the Force, so didn't protect against it. And the use of small craft. And finally, interconnected subsystems. That the Death Star was so reliant on different systems that an attack against its power systems would cause it to overload and completely detonate. Obviously, this is very different to what was laid out in Rogue One, but it makes a lot of sense. We've got future Death Stars. Then we've got templates. We've got the stats for Tarkin, Motti, General Tag, Bevel Lemelisk, Ars Dangor, Captain Kornov, Wooden Major Colders, Deserts of the Imperial Security Bureau, Ensign Hawk, a medtech, and then we've got the individual crew, so a standard Imperial Captain, Imperial Lieutenants, Shield Operation Crew, we've got the Stormtroopers, Squad Leaders. Now, I've commented before that I think the stats for Stormtroopers were kind of weird, because we've got like the Stormtrooper Squad Leader, so he's an elite trooper of the Empire. He's got a blaster skill of 4D, and he's wearing Stormtrooper armor, which takes 1D away from that. So his skill's 3D, which makes a lot of sense when you think of how inaccurate Stormtroopers are in the original movies. You know, Stormtroopers can't hit the blind side of a barn. But when we've got things like here, like Army Field Officer, with a blaster skill of 5 dice plus 2, and his armor doesn't take away from his dexterity skill, why is a field officer for the army almost twice as skilled as a Stormtrooper squad leader? Anyway, doesn't matter, the game's out of print a long time, but I've always found it a severe oddity. Go through more, so we've got army troopers, TIE fighter pilots, we've got the stats for different droids, and then we've got very brief stats for different vehicles which are aboard. So, assault shuttles, skip ray blast boats, strike cruisers, right down to TIE fighters, TIE bombers, prototype interceptors, AT-ATs, juggernauts, and then some more stats for droids, servant droids, remote droids, mouse droids. And finally, we've got an advert for Torg, the Possibility Wars, one of the games which were out at the same time. So that was the Death Star Technical Companion, and that won the poll this week. It got some 33% of the vote, so a third of the vote went for it. Now, I tried to get you to vote for something else, because I just knew the name Death Star would drag everybody's attention to that one book. And while it's a good book, it's not the best out of that selection. My personal favourite was Goroth, and that came second on 24%, so a few years listened to me, but not enough to make a difference. Behind that came the Starships of the Galaxy book for the Wizard of the Coast version of the Star Wars role-playing game, and it got 19%. Then the Truce of Bakura source book on 16%, and Flashpoint Brack Sector on 8%, which is a pity because it was a great book, and Brack Sector's a fantastic campaign book. But they were all good, and one had to win, so the Death Star won it. Now the poll is cleared off once again, and we've got fresh books, but this time they're moving from my shelves here to my bookcase over here. Now in this bookcase I tend to store stuff I've more recently received, and generally it's stuff I've been given. So these are books which I've had only in the past year or so, or past couple of years. I maybe haven't looked through in as much detail as the books in the bookcases which I've owned for years and years, and in some cases I've never even cracked open the covers. So it'll be very interesting to see what wins, and that might be me looking through a book for the very first time. So we've got Immortal the Invisible War by Precedence Entertainment. Now this is an interesting role-playing game which was played during the 1980s but didn't get published until the 1990s, and went through a couple of editions, although it's the first edition we'd be looking at. Into the Dark for Fading Suns, which is an adventure collection for Fading Suns, which is a fantastically interesting role-playing game. The Darklands for the Lone Wolf role-playing game by Mongoose. Now, Lone Wolf in many ways was my introduction to role-playing games, the fighting fantasy books and the Lone Wolf books, where they're the choose-your-own-adventure style ones. And I love the fact that they brought out a role-playing game based on it, and the Darklands is a setting of the evil Dark Lords, the villains of the setting. We've got the Minbari Federation fact book for the Babylon 5 role-playing game, also by Mongoose, detailing what starts off the series as a fairly enigmatic species, but we learn a lot about as it goes on, so there should be a lot of good details in there. And Magic, a Manual of Mystic Secrets for the Earthdawn role-playing game. Now, Earthdawn is a very magical setting. Everybody uses magic in their own ways. Even somebody just like a sword fighter weaves magic into the way they move their blade. So a magic book is a very interesting thing for the Earthdawn setting. So that'd be a fantastic book to look through. Now I know what I think's going to win. The poll actually started a couple of hours ago, so I can see the direction it's already going in. But that's just following my prediction. So we'll see what actually wins, and have a look at that next week. On channel related stuff, I'm nothing much at the moment. I've got a few things coming in slowly, but I don't feel I should talk about those until they are actually happening. So apart from that, I think I've whittled on for quite long enough. So thank you very, very much for watching. But as always, most of all, you look after yourselves, and I'll catch you later. Bye now.